My guest on the Europe Conversation this week is Henna Virkkunen, Executive Vice President of the European Commission for Tech Sovereignty, Security and Democracy. She says the EU fully intends to apply its regulations against social media companies, despite criticisms from the United States that they impinge on freedom of expression. Well, Henna Virkkunen, EU Commissioner and Executive Vice President on Tech Sovereignty, Security and Democracy. Thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And can I ask you, first of all, obviously you have such an important mandate right now at this particular moment in time when there's such fears about disinformation, interference in democracy, malinformation, and mal-business practice, where the EU has specific toolboxes, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. Can you guarantee that the EU will ensure that these are rigorously applied to all industries, particularly social media industries, particularly those based in the United States?
Yes, of course. We are now fully implementing and enforcing our rules when it comes to Digital Services Act, for example. And it's a very important tool, I see, because nowadays digital platforms, they play a very important role when we look at our society or our economy. And in the European Union, we want to make sure that also our digital environment is safe and fair and democratic. And that's why we have put certain legislations to the place, and now we are enforcing them.
Because they come under so much attack from the likes of Elon Musk, who has a specifically important role in the US administration. Are you concerned that if the EU is to go what they see as too harshly against the likes of X, that there may be retaliation? We heard, for example, Vice President J.D. Vance saying that the US could pull support for Ukraine if the EU goes after X, as they see it.
Of course, all the actions what we are taking, they have to be based to our legislation. And our rules are very fair because they are same rules for everybody who is operating and doing business in the European Union. So we have same rules for the European companies, for American companies, for the Chinese companies, because we want to make sure that we have also a fair and democratic, safe environment when it comes to our digital field. And, for example, everything what is illegal in our societies in the European Union, it's also illegal in our online world.
So what are your concerns around the likes of X and so on when it comes to algorithms, for example?
Of course, this is something also what we have been now investigating from the Commission side, especially the recommender system, for example, on different online platforms, because they have very much power what kind of content they are showing for the citizens. And one of our main principles in our rules is that we have set obligation for online platforms that they have to assess and mitigate the systematic risks, for example, what they are posing to our democratic systems, to our civic discourse, for our well-being, and also that they have to be transparent. For example, when it comes to recommender system, that the user knows why certain content is shown for her or him, and the user has to have also possibility to choose.
And how much reaction have you had from the social media companies? Because we saw Meta, for example, say that they're going to get rid of fact checkers, for example. And then we saw concerns that Elon Musk may be changing the algorithm to allow for more far-right, disruptive information, malinformation on his social media platform. But they haven't really responded positively to the EU concerns.
When it comes to Meta, they have confirmed that they will continue with the fact checkers in the European Union. And when it comes to X, in January, I made the decision that we were asking more information from X on their recommender system and what kind of changes there has been. So we have currently 10 investigations going on against very large online platforms where we are checking that if they are complying with our rules. And in the same time, we are also working all the time with online platforms with different guidelines and workshops and code of conducts and so on. So we have all the time different parts going on, how we are enforcing the rules with them.
But I guess the question is, what kind of response might you get, given that J.D. Vance has said if the EU comes after X, then there could be consequences for the US support for Ukraine. Everything is intertwined at the moment, isn't it?
I think it's important to underline that we are not going after anyone.
Yes,
we want to make sure that everybody is complying with our rules in the European Union, that they are respecting our rules, and that we are now investigating, and that's why we are having dialogue all the time going on with the online platforms.
And have they responded positively? Or with the investigation into X, for example, which started in December 23 and then was expanded just January this year, how is that investigation going? Are you getting the proper responses and engagement from X?
Normally, it's always the case with the industries that everybody is protecting their business idea very much, of course, and their business interest. But yes, the online platforms, they are cooperating with the European Commission because European Union is the biggest or second biggest market for most of them. So European Union is super important market for the digital platforms. And many of them, they have more users in the European Union than they have, for example, in USA. So, of course, it's very important for them to comply with our rules.
And would you be concerned at all that there might be a retaliation from the US government? Will you take that into account when there's a decision around what type or, how big a fine may be if they're found in breach? That it wouldn't be so high that that the Americans might say, well, you're attacking us, we're going to respond accordingly.
These legislations, when we speak about Digital Markets Act and Digital Service Act, they are very new legislations, and we are now making first decisions based on them. So, of course, we want to make sure, we want to be sure always when we are making decisions that we have to have very strong legal basis of all the decisions. And we want to make sure.
Some of those people, J.D. Vance again, but others in the United States would say that these rules are, in fact, an impression, an impact on freedom of expression, and that the EU is trying to curtail freedom of expression by imposing these laws, particularly in the DSA. What would you say to that?
That is not correct. So there is misunderstanding if some of the citizens see or some of the decision makers that we are limiting freedom of speech with these rules, because we are protecting freedom of speech with our rules. And the DSA, it's not about content. There we are just setting obligation for online platforms that they have to have practices in place, that how they make sure that they are mitigating, assessing the systematic risks, how they make sure that they are not spreading disinformation. So we are not regulating the content at all.
And then just one of the watershed moments, of course, recently was the Romanian election. There was an investigation into TikTok in relation to potentially paid bots and so on, or paid people who had elevated an ultra-nationalist contender for a presidency, which was subsequently annulled. Can you tell us a little bit about that investigation? Because that is something that has worried, I suppose, lawmakers and governments all across Europe and beyond.
We have to make sure that online platforms, they are not misused or manipulated during the elections. And that's why it's very important that they are also very well prepared for the electoral processes. And that's why we are always suggesting for the member states that before elections they are organizing so-called roundtable with online platforms and with the local authorities, with the NGOs, and then they are checking the risks of elections, that how different online platforms are prepared for that. For example, in Germany, they organized that before elections, but they also carried out so-called risk tests or before the elections to really see that how the different online platforms, how they are prepared and how they are reacting to different things, what can happen during the electoral campaigns. And also in Romania, now they are organizing that kind of event with online platforms where they are checking. So it's important that we are preparing for the elections with the national authorities and with online platforms. And also that online platforms, that they make sure that they are not misused or manipulated and they are transparent during the electoral processes.
And you're confident that the EU will not resile from implementing the DSA and DMA where and when needed, despite the confrontation with the United States?
It's super important for us that we are fully enforcing DMA and DSA, because when it comes to DMA, there we want to make sure that the big players, that they are not the dominant players, they are not misusing their market power, that also new innovations can enter to the markets in the European Union. And DSA is very much for making sure that illegal content and products are taken down and we have safe and democratic, fair environment.
So I want to just ask you about something you announced this week at the European Parliament, the EU's internal security strategy. I suppose one part of it links to what we've seen recently, which was an investigation into Huawei, or allegations of corruption, of bribery against EU officials or members of the European Parliament. This sort of aligns with that, doesn't it? Can you tell us a little bit about what the EU now needs to do to ensure that things like this don't happen again? And what is the internal strategy?
Of course, it's important when it comes to different lobbying activities that we are following all the transparency rules different institutions are having. And of course, here we are now following the investigations on this case, that what has happened. But when it comes to our security environment as a whole, the reason why we wanted to update our internal security strategy was that the security environment is very alarming. Our citizens in the European Union, they are worried about security. In the latest Eurobarometer, 64% of the citizens say that they are worried about security. And also we can see that security threats, they are now much more international and they are also very digitalized.
And just on the internal security strategy, what is the most fearful threats facing the EU in relation to that? Is it critical infrastructure attacks, cyber attacks, hybrid war?
And that is, I think, quite interesting question, that what is the biggest threat, because nowadays we can see that there is many different threats in the same time. Like you were listing, we have been witnessing a sabotage to our critical infrastructure. We have all the time massive cyber attacks towards the European Union. Also migrants, they have been used as weapons on our external borders. And of course, in the same time, we have different organized crime, terrorist groups and so on. So we have to be prepared for many, many different kind of threats. And that's why we have to closely cooperate together. And also from the Commission side, we now decided that always when we are making now new legal actions, we will include also the security assessment as a part of our impact assessment of different legislations.
OK, Commissioner Henna Virkkunen, Executive Vice President for Tech Sovereignty, Security and Democracy, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you.